I served my wife with divorce papers when I discovered she was cheating on me, yet even now, as I'm stuck here at work, she continues trying to charm her way back into my life. I feel an intense wave of anger because I've barely had any time with my son this year, didn't even get him over the summer due to this horrible virus, and that has me fuming. At the tail end of September, I finally confirmed that my wife of 5 years was being unfaithful. Ever since then, I've spent a ridiculous amount of time playing detective, peeling back layers of what feels like a swirling vortex of lies with no visible bottom. She's been in my home, this deceitful person, and I've had to sit there acting like all is well when all I want is to toss anything I can at her and order her out. My lawyer keeps cautioning me that it's not the right moment, so I'm stuck waiting. I haven't slept in my own bed for nearly 2 months now, and I plan to burn that thing the second she's gone. I haven't been intimate with her at all during this period, which ironically has led her to accuse me of cheating. If she tries to give me a hug or a kiss, I force myself to stand there, even though it makes my stomach churn. When I look at her, it's as if insects are crawling all over her. I can't stand her presence, I want her out, but the timing still isn't right, apparently. My patience is almost used up, like being locked in an echoing room where someone sits at a table, endlessly tapping their fingers until you want to flip the whole thing over and just throttle them. Because of legal constraints, I can't talk openly to anyone right now. Everyone around me keeps telling me to hold on a little longer, but I am furious at myself for letting this happen once again, for allowing someone to treat me like garbage. I ache for this nightmare to be finished, and I desperately miss my son. I arrived home late on Sunday after driving roughly 1,400 miles. In a way, the late arrival was a blessing because I was too exhausted to speak to her or look at her. I dropped into my chair and passed out. Over the last 2 months, my sleep has been abysmal, and I've shed about 15 pounds, so I look worn down and feel even worse. Still, that night was the first time in a long while that I managed to clock 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep. By Monday, though, my wife attempted to initiate intimacy, and I simply couldn't bring myself to respond. There was no physical issue, my body typically wakes up more ready than I do in the mornings. The real reason is that, for once, my mind, heart, and, let's say, my lower anatomy, are completely on the same page. I want nothing to do with her in that regard. This set her off, and we had a hot-tempered argument. I told her maybe something was wrong with me, that I'm 50 and these things happen, but she twisted that and suggested again that I must be having an affair. She insisted I wasn't pulling my weight as a husband, pointing out that I haven't been intimate with her for over 2 months, haven't told her I love her in the same span, so obviously I must be hiding something. The ironic part is that she tried to manipulate me psychologically, even though I knew full well what she was up to. The turning point for me was discovering her actions on September 25th, my personal D-Day, though I had suspicions before that. I work in collision repair, focusing on particularly wrecked vehicles, and on September 25th, I badly cut my leg on a truck I was working on, which required a trip to the emergency room. I got 5 stitches internally and 34 externally. The injury was significant enough that I was prescribed heavy painkillers, making it impossible to drive. Of course, I tried calling my wife, several times, at 5-minute intervals, but she never answered. I sent text after text, "Hey babe, I need you, please pick up." Still no response. An hour and a half passed with no word from her, so I took an Uber home. As soon as we turned onto my street, I saw her standing right in our front doorway, fervently making out with the general manager from her work. This wasn't some gentle peck, this was a full-on passionate kiss. She was supposed to be on the clock at that moment. I quickly snapped photos, instructed my driver to keep going, and had him bring me back to my shop. I spent 4 hours in our break room, feeling numb and devastated, head resting on the table. Once the pain meds wore off, I painfully drove home, dealing with both the gash in my leg and the massive ache in my chest. She wasn't home when I got there, and when she did show up, she acted concerned about my injury, maybe genuinely, maybe not, and concocted a story about her day at work, which I now know to be a complete fabrication. A week later, I discovered she hadn't worked a single Friday in 3 years. I hadn't used Reddit much before, but in desperation, I scoured the internet for any guidance on how to handle infidelity. I stumbled onto a community that outlined typical red flags: constant phone activity, endless texting, never answering her spouse's calls. Every warning sign fit her perfectly. She didn't realize until last Monday that I'd been blowing up her phone while sitting alone in the ER, trying to get her attention. For an entire 2 months, she never bothered to glance at our chat log. When she started yelling about me needing to be a better husband, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened our text thread, shot the evidence in her face, and demanded to know why she wasn't there for me when I needed her help just once in our whole marriage. She checked her phone, then left for a few hours. Returning later, she apologized, then lied to my face, claiming she'd had a tough day at work and was too swamped to notice her messages. The truth is, she was too busy getting cozy with her boss in my own home to pick up her phone. In the days since, I've snooped through her devices, phone, laptop, iPad, and even figured out how to see her data from one of her older phones. I've placed cameras all over our house. I had her served with divorce papers yesterday. People asked why I hadn't mentioned it earlier, but I was in a terrible mental place and still am. Yet I need to vent it out now. I woke up, drove off to get some breakfast while waiting for her to leave for her job, then rented a truck and returned to the house. My first act was changing the locks. A friend of mine, along with her husband and another helper, showed up to pack my wife's things. We grabbed the bedroom furniture I'd given her as a wedding present, plus our couch, our dining table, basically anything she had stained with her cheating, and stuck it all into a storage unit. We stuffed her clothing into trash bags. I contemplated mixing her dirty and clean clothes together, but my friend wouldn't let me, so we tried to keep it semi-orderly. By about 11 a.m., we were finished. Around lunchtime, I decided to make a scene in a memorable way. I bought flowers and chocolates, then went to my wife's workplace. I waltzed in, handed her the bouquet, the candy, and gave her an exaggerated hug and kiss. She turned red as a tomato, and her co-workers cooed about how thoughtful and sweet it was. I told her I'd love to take her out for lunch, but needed to get my leg checked, and suggested she keep her evening open for a very special night. Then I left, blowing her a kiss on my way out. On my way through, I spotted her boss, whom I'll call Tom or Foot, and gave him a big grin, greeting him by name. After that, I grabbed lunch for myself. Exactly at 2 p.m., a deputy walked into her office to hand her the divorce papers. Meanwhile, at that same moment, I was standing outside Tom's house. I sent him the photos I had snapped the day I caught them both, plus a selfie of me standing right in front of his home. Then I knocked on his door, and Mrs. Feet answered. She recognized me from various gatherings involving my wife's workplace. I calmly explained that my wife and her husband were having an affair, which she naturally didn't believe at first. Once I showed her the initial picture, plus a lovey-dovey selfie they took on my couch, she reacted by slapping me. I just stood there and let her cry. I handed her a thumb drive containing all the evidence, texts, images, logs that proved the infidelity. I also advised her to get tested for STDs, as my wife had been with multiple men. I gave her my lawyer's contact information and my personal number. She asked me why I was doing this to her, and the question cut me deeply. I felt guilty for ripping her world apart, but I told her she deserved the truth. Then I left. On my way out, my phone exploded with calls and texts, which I ignored. Once I got home, I changed my Facebook status to divorced, then looked at the barrage of messages from my wife. What is this? What are you doing? That sort of thing. I texted her to say she could come by at 7 p.m. sharp, and not a moment sooner, to retrieve her clothes. Evidently, Tom didn't tell her straight away what I'd done, probably because he had his own crisis to handle, but eventually, he must have spilled the beans, because she texted me later, fuming that I had told Mrs. Foot. Then my friend, who had helped cover up my wife's affair, let's call her Amber, started calling, so I picked up. I demanded, "How long have you known about my wife and Tom? Don't lie." She admitted she'd known since before my wife and I had even met. That bitter confession left me reeling. Turns out I was the side piece all along, and our whole marriage was some elaborate charade. I asked why she never told me, and she said they were afraid I'd go nuts. I reminded her that she knows me well, and I'm not that kind of violent person. She claimed she was only protecting my wife because they were friends. I shot back that I thought she was also my friend, that if her own husband were cheating, wouldn't she want someone to warn her? She agreed. I hung up, then texted her the pictures my wife had taken with her husband, along with my lawyer's number, and told her never to speak to me again. At around 4 p.m., my wife showed up, discovered the changed locks, and started hammering on the door, yelling. I refused to answer. She called my phone repeatedly, so I muted it. She actually shattered a window before leaving. Fast forward to around 7 p.m., and 2 deputies arrived along with one of them who had helped me move furniture earlier that day. That person's wife and my friend also showed up. My wife arrived right on time, looking decidedly beaten down. Clearly she and Amber must have tangled by then. I handed her all her clothes, the storage unit key and address, plus my lawyer's business card, telling her that from now on, any communication would go through legal channels. She pleaded that she loved me, that we could fix this, that the other men meant nothing. I just pointed at the attorney's card. She argued it was her house too, and I told her she'd forfeited that right by crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Her tone escalated into anger, hurling insults at me. The deputies turned on their lights, and neighbors started peeking out at the drama. I stayed calm, arms at my sides. She was screaming, probably intoxicated, then began crying that she had nowhere to go. I said I didn't care, and that triggered a new discovery: my wife knows how to throw a vicious right hook. She clocked me, giving me a fat lip and drawing blood from my nose. I just stood there, unmoving. She tried clawing my face, but the deputies wrestled her away. I declined to press charges, only wanting her gone. They documented it, though, so I could request a restraining order if needed. To be truthful, I was almost relieved she'd finally given people a front row view of her true behavior. Once she was gone, I went inside and started cleaning myself up. Suddenly, the torrent of emotions I'd suppressed for 2 months arrived all at once, and I felt completely worn down. People assume you'll feel relief once you expose all this ugliness, but in my case, it just felt raw. I'm not usually one to cry, but I have been doing plenty of that since last night. My phone has nearly 600 missed texts and calls and counting. I plan to ignore all mutual friends, no desire for any of them to play mediator. I usually call my son every single evening, but I skipped last night. I'll speak with him tonight. Frankly, he'll probably be fine with the divorce news because he never liked her. I had a meeting with her and her attorney earlier. I didn't walk away with everything I envisioned, but I got enough to secure an uncontested divorce. It'll be final in about 2 months, and that's one silver lining. I feel a partial sense of relief but also a huge measure of sorrow for how everything ended up. She couldn't or wouldn't look me in the eye through most of the process, which might be guilt, shame, or something else. Her lawyer seemed decent and recognized the complexities here. They inquired about the possibility of reconciliation, which we pretended to entertain just to keep them talking, though truly it was never on the table. We demanded she come clean about all her dalliances. Apparently, the lawyer had her write out a list, but it fell short of what I already knew. I reviewed her little document and noticed 2 men I'd caught on camera were conspicuously absent. My lawyer produced screenshots from the hidden cameras and asked who those men were. She was also withholding information from her own lawyer, so they asked us to step outside. I couldn't pick up all the words, but there was no mistaking the frustration in his voice. When we came back, she finally admitted the 2 unidentified guys were recent hookups from the internet. Then she confessed that she'd been carrying on a long-term affair with Tom basically the entire time I'd known her. She claimed she ended it when I proposed and supposedly didn't pick it up again until a year after we were married. I can't be sure if that's true, her credibility is gone, but maybe it has a sliver of truth. I asked her point blank if there was ever a time in our marriage she'd been completely faithful. She admitted that on July 4, 2019, she had sex with Amber's husband, my co-worker's husband, during a 4th of July barbecue at my own house while I was present on the property. She said she didn't love him, just got a thrill out of it. Over the subsequent year, she grew more brazen, hooking up with random guys from dating sites. I suspect she also had quick encounters in parking lots or other shady spots, but I didn't push for more details. I asked the lawyers to give us a few minutes alone. Then I asked her, not just about why she cheated, but why she ever married me in the first place. Why go through with the wedding if she wanted someone else? She claimed she loved me, that she wanted marriage and the stability it brought, and that I satisfied her in bed. But she admitted she had loved Tom for a decade, and he wasn't leaving his own wife. Her biological clock was ticking, so I was basically her backup plan. She said she was happy with me, but she craved exactly what she craved, no matter who got hurt. As for people curious about repercussions at work, both she and Tom ended up getting fired. Amber created quite the uproar, so I didn't even have to intervene. My soon-to-be ex is living with her parents. I have no clue what Tom or Mrs. Feet are doing, since I've been told it's none of my business. I suspect he's trying to cling to his marriage, and if he manages to stay with Mrs. Feet, there's a chance I might cross paths with him. I asked my wife if there was anything else I needed to hear, and she dropped a brutal revelation. 2 years ago, she'd had an abortion because she wasn't sure whose baby it was. That cut me deeply. In the early days, we had tried for a kid, or at least we didn't actively prevent it, we just figured we'd enjoy each other and see what happened. I would have loved to have another child, ideally a little girl to dote on. Considering how frequently we had unprotected sex, there's a significant possibility that baby was mine, and I'll never get an answer. A lot of people say, well, you dodged a bullet, but all I can think is she may have aborted my child. If anyone has ever gone a few rounds in a boxing ring, there comes a point when you're getting hit again and again, but you're too numb to truly register the pain. That's me right now. At this stage, she could tell me she was responsible for the Great Chicago Fire, and I'd probably just nod without surprise. I called the attorneys back in, told them we were proceeding with Plan B, which meant I'd drop my demand for alimony entirely and wanted an immediate uncontested divorce. Sure, I considered being clever or petty, like telling her I'd only reconcile if she undid all those hookups, but that's nonsense. I won't lie, the abortion has been rattling around in my mind constantly. I also don't want to pay alimony, because it would be a monthly reminder of her existence. So at 5:43 p.m., she signed. In 2 months, it'll be finalized. I keep the house, my retirement accounts, my property, no alimony either way. She gets $73,000 from our joint savings and can never contact me again. That's it. I'm done. I don't care what she does or where she goes. For her own sake, and for any future partner she meets, I hope she eventually goes to therapy. But I'm beyond caring. I don't feel relieved in the slightest. It's like I've been force-fed a rotten sandwich and that rancid aftertaste won't leave my tongue. I haven't experienced a single shred of joy in 3 months, and I'm not discovering any now. The abortion news is wedged in my brain, and I suspect it will remain there for a very long time. I have no idea what my immediate or long-term plans look like. Maybe once the divorce is fully locked in, I'll feel a slight sense of closure, but right now, I just want to be left alone. I don't want more people saying, "Oh man, I'm so sorry," or giving me that pained face. I want quiet. I've been replaying my life, and all I see are my failings, which is a lousy mindset, but that's where I am. The only positive is that this time, I keep my possessions. I'm never going through this again. The divorce decree came in the mail today, delayed a bit by a monstrous snowstorm. Oddly enough, I don't feel either happiness or sadness, just a pervasive numbness. Certain friends suggested celebrating, but I can't fathom cheering for what feels like a profound personal failure. Perhaps it will sink in deeper later, but for now, I'm disconnected from the whole thing. Then, completely out of nowhere, she called me. I picked up because, well, it's a done deal, so why not? She's more of a mess than I am, and she didn't even bother apologizing. She questioned what good an apology would do anyway, and honestly, I'm not sure if she genuinely regrets her actions. It's irrelevant now. Her parents are tangled in this. My son was their closest shot at a grandchild, and he asked me if he could still talk to them. I'm okay with that, but I don't see how I can maintain contact with them without her somehow inserting herself into it. Everything they touch seems to turn chaotic. I actually liked her dad a lot. He was the closest thing to my boy having a grandfather figure from my side. In other news, I named my Chihuahua Dulce, thanks to whoever floated that suggestion, and she's been my little lifesaver through Snowmageddon, the 5-day freeze with no power or heat. She huddled with me and kept the bed warm like a miniature hero. In any event, I plan to step away from here for a bit, at least until I'm ready to date again or maybe just dabble in something casual. That nagging voice inside has always whispered she didn't really love me, she'd eventually leave, she'd inevitably destroy me, and now it feels deafening. I'm doing fine enough, though. That cautionary fear of a hot stove might be a good thing for me right now. I need plenty of time for myself, and I'll take it. My best wishes go out to everyone reading. Just because people disappoint us, it doesn't mean we're worthless. Keep your resolve. I appreciate all of you. I started therapy in July to tackle a variety of underlying problems, both directly connected to this round of betrayal and issues that stand apart. Sharing the story here and discussing it with my therapist has made me realize there are other unresolved matters in my life. To be totally transparent, I'd like to rebuild a relationship with my sister, who's really the only family member I have left. Part of me wonders if I have the courage to make that move because I've harbored a serious grudge for so many years. I want my son to have connections with blood relatives on my side, not just my buddies he calls uncle or aunt. This is something my very first infidelity experience took away from me, and I'm craving to reclaim at least a portion of it. If my sister is open to talking, then I'll talk. I think my cousin will help set this up. I realize I've often told people to cut off anyone who isn't in their corner, but nearly 3 decades of estrangement is a lot to bear. My parents are gone, my brother's gone, and that leaves just my sister. My therapist supports the idea of trying to mend things, and I need to summon the nerve to reach out. I'm tired of nurturing hostility. I still believe I had valid reasons for cutting contact all those years ago, but I don't want to remain stuck in that mindset. I hold indefinite custody of my son now, and I'd like to offer him a sense of normalcy, however partial. I don't miss my ex, nor my first ex, but I do miss my sister. I've let my initial wife's terrible behavior shape all my family connections for far too long. Sometimes it feels like ghosts are following me, reminders of who I used to be. Maybe if I reclaim even a sliver of what I lost, I'll be able to move on. I'm not pining after any ex, I'm just tangled up in my past. In case anyone is curious, I have zero knowledge about how my ex is doing. I don't talk to her. Same goes for Amber, she's erased from my life like a nasty memory. I'm also clueless about anyone who ran in my ex's circles. I have only one single concern regarding all those folks, and I'm not inclined to share it. In 1 hour, it'll be exactly a year to the day since I served my ex with divorce papers. I got up feeling good, went for a jog, cooked breakfast for my son, and headed to work. The day was rolling along just fine, and mentally, I was in a decent place. Then at around 10:30 a.m., I got summoned to the office because there was a delivery of cookies for me, courtesy of my ex. She'd do this every year, like clockwork. I told people in the office they could eat them if they liked. Our customer service rep asked who sent them, so I explained. Nobody had touched the cookies yet, which is understandable, and I felt mildly annoyed that someone had given her my work info. Other than that, my mood wasn't wrecked. She pulls a variety of stunts to keep herself on my radar, like being late on her car payment so the finance company contacts me. This is another variant of that game. But honestly, the day was still going pretty well. When I got home, I found a surprise gathering of friends who'd put together barbecue and brought beer to celebrate. I genuinely love my friends, they guessed I might need a pick-me-up, although I was doing fine except for the cookie episode. This party was an awesome way to wrap up a fairly good day, adding a pleasant final touch to the 1-year mark of this whole ordeal.